Told you we should have left a trail of breadcrumbs.
Darren, we better turn around.
Why?
Because I've seen enough horror movies to know any weirdo wearing a mask is never friendly.
Friday the 13th is an American horror franchise that comprises of 12 slasher films, a television series, novels, comic books, video games, and tie-in merchandise. The franchise mainly focuses on the fictional character Jason Voorhees. Voorhees was thought to have drowned as a boy at Camp Crystal Lake due to the negligence of the camp staff. Decades later, the camp is rumoured to be cursed and is the setting for a series of mass murders. Jason is featured in all of the films as either the killer or the motivation for the killings. The original film was created to cash in on the success of Halloween. Although not popular with critics, Friday the 13th is considered one of the most successful media franchises in America. The films have grossed over $468 million at the box office worldwide. It was the highest grossing horror franchise in the world since the resurgence of the Halloween franchise in 2018. For this retrospective, I will be reviewing each 10 films, leaving out the remake and Freddy vs. Jason, which I covered in my Nightmare on Elm Street franchise review. I will be giving my own thoughts, and each film will get a marking from 1 to 10. It's 1958 at Camp Crystal Lake, and an unseen assailant prowls the camp before murdering 2 camp counselors. Then the Friday the 13th font crashes through the screen with all the force of a sponge being thrown at a pillow. We flash forward to June 1980 and meet camp counselor Annie Phillips making her way to Camp Crystal Lake. She asks a dog for directions, who unfortunately doesn't bite her, and then gets a cold reception from the locals. A local lunatic warns her about the dangers of Crystal Lake and that a boy drowned there many years ago. Then a truck driver offers to take her halfway to her destination, and all is well. Meanwhile at the camp, Ned, Jack, Bill, Marcy, Brenda and Alice, along with owner Steve Christie, are refurbishing the cabins and facilities. The unknown assailant stalks them from a ridiculously close viewpoint. In fact, he's standing so close that one of the counsellors almost walks right into him. After that, we see Annie continuing her journey to Camp Crystal Lake as hitched a ride with a mysterious driver. After sensing danger, she asks the driver to stop before jumping out and fleeing into the woods. The stranger pursues her before catching her and cutting her throat. Back to Camp Crystal Lake, and the counsellors continue not to work while being stalked by our unknown assailant. Then for no reason they kill a snake. As night falls, the group are killed one by one until we are left with only one camp counsellor. Alice finds her friends have been killed and in hysterics meets a middle-aged woman claiming to be a friend of Steve, the owner of the camp. Mrs. Voorhees reveals her son was Jason, the boy who drowned in 1957. She blames his death on neglect by the camp counsellors at the time.
Jason should have been watched every minute. He wasn't a very good swimmer.
After she explodes in a murderous rage, we come to the conclusion our unknown assailant was a sweet-talking woman in her 50s. Luckily, none of the people she murdered, being half her age and some twice her size, put up any resistance, so it worked out perfectly. Anyway, Mrs. Voorhees attacks Alice, who knocks her out easily. Then Mrs. Voorhees decides she'll need a weapon to kill Alice, so she attacks her with a machete. Alice doesn't like this, so she takes the machete off her and chops her head clean off her shoulders. After the killing, Alice feels like taking a canoe around the lake, so she does. She lies in the canoe stroking the water until morning, where she sees the police calling her. Then zombie Jason attacks her, dragging her into the lake. Alice then awakes in the hospital and is told there were no survivors. She asks if the boy who attacked her was alive, to which they reply there was no boy. She proclaims he's still there while the camera zooms in on Camp Crystal Lake and the film fades out. Excellent film. A bit of boring subplot, but a great twist at the end. 9 out of 10 for that one. Continuing from the previous events, the film opens to an unknown assailant approaching an apartment block. Inside we see Alice, who is having nightmares about the experiences from the previous film. I guess we're showing this for that 1% of the audience who are watching part 2 of Friday the 13th without seeing part 1. Alice's mother phones to check she's okay and is reassured by her. Then she's killed by an unknown assailant by putting an ice pick through her head. Then the kettle boils, so he takes it off the stove. 5 years later, we're introduced to our group of camp counselors and the worst play fighting ever seen on film. On their way to camp, they find an old sign for Camp Crystal Lake, and an unknown assailant watches them from the trees. When they reach their destination, Paul Holt, the trainer for camp counselors, gathers the group together. While giving an insanely boring talk, they're all astounded when someone arrives late. Around the campfire that night, Paul tells the counselors the legend of Jason Voorhees, a boy who drowned at Camp Crystal Lake in 1957. According to legend, Jason survived and is living in the woods that surrounds Crystal Lake. But seeing as he was last spotted as a 10-year-old child, and this being 5 years later, he should only be 15 by now. Anyway, the next day a dog is found slaughtered, and while driving through Crystal Lake, the local sheriff catches a glimpse of a man running across the road wearing a burlap sack. He chases the mysterious man through the woods and finds a shack somebody has built. While looking through the rooms completely off guard, he's attacked by an unknown assailant with a claw hammer. Back at camp, Paul decides the best thing for the counselors to do is go out drinking before he trains them the next day. So all but 6 head off and get drunk on the suggestion of their boss. At the bar, they discuss the legend of Jason Voorhees.
I mean, what would he be like today? Some kind of out-of-control psychopath?
An out-of-control 15-year-old psychopath.
A child trapped in a man's body?
Or a child in a child's body.
He must have seen his mother get killed, and all just because she loved him.
Yeah, it was about love, man. Meanwhile, the assailant begins killing off the 6 one by one and is seen in full view for the first time. This confirms that Jason Voorhees is the unknown assailant, and he's the biggest, strongest 15-year-old known to man. On returning to the camp incredibly sober, Ginny and Paul find blood stains on a bed. Paul is then attacked by our unknown assailant while Ginny watches and does nothing to help. A chase then ensues with Ginny eventually discovering the head of Mrs. Voorhees. Ginny puts on Pamela's sweater and tries to psychologically convince Jason that she is his mother. The ruse briefly works because apparently he completely forgets that Ginny looks nor sounds anything like his mother, and his mother is dead. Jason snaps out of the delusions when he sees his mother's head on the altar and attacks Ginny. But luckily Paul tackles Jason, giving Ginny time to stab him with a machete. Then they return to their cabin and all's well until Jason jumps through the glass window and attacks Ginny. But it's okay because that was a dream, I think, and Ginny is carted away in an ambulance with the film ending on a close-up of Mrs. Voorhees' head for some reason. Very good sequel, perhaps the most underrated of the series. I love the sack Jason wore. I found it way more frightening than the hockey mask he later dons. And I love the scene when Ginny's in the shack and Jason's running towards her and then she turns around and notices him. Also, this is the only film in which we see Jason running, and I thought that made him more scary. 8 out of 10 for that one. The film opens to a recap of the previous events and these awful titles indicating that this time it's in 3D. Continuing on from the events of the night before, 2 shop owners are attacked by a badly injured and unmasked Jason Voorhees. Meanwhile, a new group of teens are travelling to Higgins Haven, owned by Chris Haven, located on Camp Crystal Lake. The group consists of the stereotype made up of each 80s film. The pretty guy, the not very pretty guy, the obnoxious girl, and the stone people. On their way, they almost run over some idiot sleeping in the road. He warns them of the dangers ahead and they arrive at Higgins Haven. For some reason, Chris's ex-boyfriend is hanging around the cabin she owns and grabs her by the neck on entry.
Doesn't look like anything's changed, though.
Why would it have changed? If you hadn't decorated, it wouldn't have changed. Chris alludes to a traumatic experience that happened years ago at the cabin without telling the audience what it was, and her boyfriend hints at raping her.
There's only so many cold showers I can take.
Then we see the barn, and it's a good barn. After that, the group splits up with some of them heading to the local store. While there, a biker gang bullies them for absolutely no reason. On their way out, they accidentally reverse into the gang's bikes, and one of the biker punches their car windscreen through. Back at the cabin, Jason stalks them from the barn, and the biker gang steals the petrol from their van. The gang decides to burn down their barn using the petrol, but Jason likes the barn, so he kills them all. As night falls, Chris reveals 2 years earlier she was attacked by a man and alludes to being raped by him. This was the reason she left Crystal Lake, and she's returned to confront her demons or something. Back at the cabin, we see Jason for the first time, and he's gained 4 stone and grown 3 inches overnight. The body count rises at the cabin as the group are picked off one by one. Rick and Chris head back to the cabin to find no sign of the group. Then Jason crushes Rick's head with some terrible special effects. Chris discovers dead bodies and barricades herself in the cabin. Then, in a moment nobody saw coming, Jason throws Rick's body through the window. Jason then climbs in through the window and is almost knocked out by 3 books hitting him. Chris then stabs Jason, jumps out the window, hits him with a log which makes him fly forward for some reason, and drives away in the van. The van soon cuts out with a shortage of gas, and with Jason chasing behind her, Chris doesn't think to wind her window up, so Jason chokes her, but then she does wind her window up and runs away. They end up in the barn where Chris knocks Jason unconscious and hangs him, but being hung doesn't break his neck and kill him. In fact, it doesn't bother him at all. Jason lifts his mask and reveals he's the man who raped her years earlier. Then one of the bikers shows up and gets chopped up before Chris puts an axe through Jason's head. After that, Chris decides to go for a nap in a canoe. She awakes in the morning to Jason running towards her from the house, but then he disappears. Then zombie Mrs. Voorhees pulls her into the lake. The next scene shows the police at the cabin claiming Chris has lost her mind, and some incredible acting ensues. The film ends with Jason still lying in the barn where he'd been seen previously, apparently dead. I'm biased towards this one as I love watching it as a kid, but I do get why this is seen as one of the worst films of the franchise. 6 out of 10 for that one. The film opens to flashbacks from the previous 3 films. The film then carries on the night after the events of the previous film. Jason is believed to be dead and is taken to the morgue. While there, the mortician uses a dead body as a plate for his sandwich and jokes about having sex with a corpse.
All you gotta do is go over there, take off your pants. Nice talk, real nice talk.
We soon see Jason is not dead and he kills both the staff. Next, we flash to our group of teenagers heading to Crystal Lake for the weekend. Among them is Crispin Glover, who acts incredibly weird.
I did. I treated her right.
After that, the teens discover the gravestone of Mrs. Voorhees. When the group arrive, they meet their neighbours Trish Jarvis and her 12-year-old son Tommy. The next day they go skinny dipping at Crystal Lake, and later that night Crispin Glover dances. With the party underway, Jason starts murdering the teens one by one until only Tommy and Trish are left. Tommy and Trish barricade themselves in the house, but Jason throws a body through the window for the 50th time and enters the house. Then Trish smashes a TV over Jason's head, which obviously doesn't kill him, and he chases after her. Meanwhile, Tommy cuts off all his hair to look like Jason, which distracts him so Trish can stab him with a machete. But her aim is so terrible she only cuts his mask off. Tommy picks up the machete and stabs him through his head. The next day in the hospital, Tommy visits Trish and gives an evil look into the camera, indicating he's going to be the next Jason, or he's at least going to kill more people. This film is shite. Never liked it. Young Tommy Jarvis annoys me. This film's titled The Final Chapter, but we've got 6 more to go. 4 out of 10 for that one. The film opens to a young Tommy Jarvis witnessing 2 teens digging up Jason Voorhees' body and then being killed. As Jason approaches Tommy, he awakens and is revealed to now be in his teenage years, even though the actor is about 25. Tommy has been committed to a mental institution due to the trauma from the events of the previous film.
It's wonder his mind isn't fried with all the drugs I've given him.
How do you know his mind isn't fried? He hasn't said one word yet. Tommy sits in his room, looks at pictures, and for some reason owns a carving knife. Then after that, Kid thinks it would be funny to scare Tommy, and Tommy scares him back. We're then introduced to the next group of teenagers and the local farmer who threatens to kill everyone.
The next little bastard comes near my farm, I'm gonna blow your brains out.
Then one of the group members kills another one of the group for offering him a chocolate bar. Joey, the member of the group who was killed, is taken away by paramedics, one of which seems very traumatized. That night, 2 morons break down and are killed by an unknown assailant. The next morning, Tommy is still haunted by the memories of killing Jason Voorhees, and he's apparently been weightlifting. At breakfast, one of the group decides to push Tommy to breaking point, and he responds in a calm manner. That night, 2 other characters we don't care about are killed by an unknown assailant. The next day, the police speculate Jason Voorhees is behind the recent murders.
You get me a goddamn live suspect.
Yes, stop bringing in dead suspects. After that, a couple from the mental home are killed by an unknown assailant. That night, someone decides to annoy Tommy and he beats the crap out of them too. Then more people we don't know or care about are killed. After, we see our first shot of the killer. Jason Voorhees breaks through the door of the mental institution. He gives chase to 2 of the survivors and is hit by a tractor, but he gets up and the fight continues. Tommy shows up and Jason falls onto a tractor harrow, killing him instantly. In the process, his mask falls off, revealing the killer was actually the traumatized paramedic from earlier. At the hospital, the police reveal that he was the father of Joey, the teen killed earlier by the other guy. He sought revenge inspired by the stories of Jason Voorhees, which doesn't really make any sense because he didn't kill the guy who killed his son. In fact, that was the only guy he didn't kill. But anyway, in the last scene, Tommy is recovering in hospital, but then smashes a window and wears a Jason mask, finally losing his battle for his sanity. This was an okay addition to the franchise. At least they tried something different. 6 out of 10 for that one. The film opens sometime after the previous installment, and Tommy Jarvis, who looks completely different, is driving to Camp Crystal Lake, now renamed Forest Green. He plans to destroy the corpse of Jason Voorhees in hopes it will stop his hallucinations. When they open the casket, Tommy stabs the decaying corpse with a steel bar and begins opening a gasoline canister to burn the remains. At this moment, lightning strikes the rod and rejuvenates Jason as he attacks Tommy. Tommy throws gasoline on Jason, spilling half of it on himself in the process, and attempts to light a match. Luckily for Tommy, the rain puts the match out and Jason stands there staring at Tommy for no reason. Tommy's friend breaks a shovel over Jason's head, and Jason, now with superhuman strength, punches straight through his body. Tommy runs off, and for the first time in a horror film, the car starts straight away as he drives off. He heads into the nearest police station and tells the sheriff he dug up Jason Voorhees' body and was going to cremate him. He then grabs one of the shotguns from the gun rack. He's thrown into a cell and told nobody in Forest Green wants to remember the events in Camp Crystal Lake. After that, a couple driving through Forest Green come across Jason standing in the road. They decide the best thing to do is to drive up to him. And then they decide the next best thing to do is stand in front of him. The next morning, a group of teens, one being the sheriff's daughter, report 2 missing people, and the sheriff doesn't care. Later at Camp Forest Green, our new group of camp counselors unpack, and for the first time in the franchise, we actually see children at a child's camp. Then, to get the body count up, Jason kills some morons paintballing. Meanwhile, Tommy is released and escorted out of town, where the sheriff tells him he'll kill him if he ever returns. That night, Jason ups the body count, killing 2 of our counselors in the process. He then stands on a camper van. When the police find out about the recent murders, they decide Tommy was responsible despite having no evidence. The sheriff then regrets not killing him in cold blood for no reason. After that, the sheriff's daughter, having seen Tommy through a jail cell for all of 3 minutes, is willing to do anything to help him. Tommy is arrested, and even after the sheriff is told Tommy was with his daughter at the time of the murders, still keeps him detained. Tommy is broken out of the cell and heads to Forest Green for a showdown with Jason. They wrestle on a boat and Tommy wraps a chain around his neck, anchoring him down in the lake. Jason is then cut up by the propellers of the speedboat. The film ends with Jason at the bottom of Camp Crystal Lake, still alive, ready to make some more cash for the next sequel. Very good addition to the series. This is also a fan favourite. 7 out of 10 for that one. The film opens to flashbacks from previous films, as if anyone doesn't know the story by now. Then we're shown a young Tina Shepard witness her alcoholic father abuse her mother. She accidentally channels her psychic abilities, which destroy the dock her father's standing on, and he drowns. It really goes downhill from this point, and it's only just started. Tina then awakes and she's now in her teenage years. Her mother is driving to Crystal Lake as part of the treatment given by her psychiatrist, Dr. Cruz. Then while dropping her luggage, Tina demonstrates some awful acting.
Thanks.
Here.
Thanks. You've been a great help.
Dr. Cruz begins experiments to channel Tina's telekinetic abilities, and we're shown they come out when she's enraged. They should just send her a copy of this film. Tina has a breakdown because she misses her alcoholic dad. She goes out to the dock, and while thinking about her dad, she brings Jason Voorhees back to life. In the next scene, Nick, a person Tina's never met, knocks on her door and invites her to a party, and her mom suggests she goes. Then Jason kills a couple in the woods. After that, we meet a new group of teens, and Tina sees a vision of one of them being killed by Jason. Dr. Cruz tells Tina these are delusions brought on by her guilt of killing her father. Then Jason kills more people in the woods. The next morning, we see the worst acting and dialogue from the whole franchise.
Where are you from?
Where are you from?
Oh, we're doing real good here, aren't we? I grew up in Pittsburgh. I used to hang out with a real bad crowd. Now, I go to night school.
Then Tina meets back up with a group of teens and they make fun of her. Later that night, Tina has another breakdown because she wants to leave. Then she uses her mind to throw a TV at a wall. Meanwhile, the teens throw a party where marijuana has the same effect as ecstasy, and more of the group are killed. Back at the cabin, Tina's mother discovers Dr. Cruz has been deliberately adding to Tina's mental stress. He decides he will have Tina committed as she's a danger to others. Jason kills more teens and Tina begins discovering them. Jason kills Tina's mother and Dr. Cruz, and back at the cabin they have a final showdown. Using her mind, Tina wraps a cable around Jason's neck, hanging him, and then drops him through the floor. Then she shoots him with nails, burns and blows him up. But he's okay and he comes to kill Tina on the dock. Then Tina's dead dad rises from the lake, dragging Jason back down with him. The film ends with Tina and Nick driven away in an ambulance. God awful. From the acting to the dialogue to the story, this is the worst so far. 3 out of 10 for that one. The film opens to generic 80s music and grim scenes of New York City. On a boat on Camp Crystal Lake, a young man regales his love interest in the legend of Jason Voorhees. At this moment, the anchor on the boat damages some underwater electric cables and they shock Jason Voorhees, resurrecting him back to life. Then Jason kills the couple. The next morning, a group of students board a cruise ship heading to New York City. The boat from Camp Crystal Lake is shown floating nearby, which means so is Jason. He soon boards the ship and we're introduced to the students. There's an amateur boxer, a guy who films everything, a wannabe rock star, the captain's son Sean, and his girlfriend Rennie. That night, Jason smashes a guitar over a girl's head and Rennie sees visions of Jason as a boy. Meanwhile, a boxing match takes place where every shot thrown is landed by one opponent and every shot thrown is missed by the other. The body count rises, and with the discovery of the captain's body, the group speculate Jason Voorhees is responsible. The film also debuts Jason's ability to teleport. When the boat becomes damaged, the remaining survivors board a lifeboat and continue to their destination. When the group reaches New York City, they are mugged and Rennie is kidnapped. The kidnappers inject her with heroin and then attempt to rape her, but Jason kills them. Jason comes across the boxer of the group who has terrible balance but punches him 46 times. Jason then punches him once and knocks his head off. The group find Rennie and she has a memory of her dad giving her swimming lessons by pushing her into Camp Crystal Lake. Then Jason teleports again. After that, we end up in the sewer for the final showdown, and Rennie throws toxic waste in Jason's face and he drowns, which turns him back into a boy. The film ends as Rennie and Sam embrace and Rennie's dog shows up somehow. This film gets a lot of flack, mainly because only the last 30 minutes were actually shot in New York and the rest was on a ship. It's definitely low down on the rankings, but a bit better than the previous installment. 4 out of 10 for that one. Okay, this one's going to be painful. The film opens to a young lady approaching Crystal Lake and the perfect victim for Norman Bates, Jason Voorhees. After taking a shower, Jason shows up and a chase ensues. Just as Jason teleports next to her and is about to kill her, a SWAT team open fire on him. Turns out the whole thing was a setup in order to kill Jason once and for all. Jason's remains are sent to the morgue where his heart is still beating, and the beating heart possesses the mortician to eat it. Thus Jason is back with a new body, and he chops his work colleague's head off. Next we flash to bounty hunter Creighton Duke being interviewed, who somehow knows Jason's body possessing supernatural abilities. He offers to kill Jason, but at a cost of $500,000. His offer is then accepted and he begins his bounty hunt. Duke heads to a cafe which is capitalizing on Jason's notoriety. There he meets waitress Diana Kimball, the half-sister of Jason, and explains only members of Jason's bloodline can kill him. How he knows this, God only knows. Meanwhile, a group of teens are killed by Jason. Jason then kidnaps a policeman and possesses his body. He goes to Diana's house in order to possess her body, but just kills her instead. Stephen, a relative of Jason, is blamed and imprisoned for the murder. While there, he meets the bounty hunter in the next cell who keeps breaking his fingers. Stephen escapes from his cell and Jason possesses more people, and then Duke escapes from his cell. Jason possesses more and more people, then his heart is like a small animal, and then takes on his original form again. I don't know. At this point, why not just have anything happen? Jason turns into a folk singer and plays a possession song. I started possessing people not so long ago. Then I wrote the possession song and possessed everyone I know. Duke's killed and Jason's pulled into hell by some kind of soul. The film ends with Freddy Krueger laughing and pulling Jason's mask through the ground, alluding to the long-awaited Freddy vs. Jason film. That was a really good film, for a moron. If you like this film, there's something wrong with you. 1 out of 10 for that one. The film opens and Jason has been captured and restrained at Camp Crystal Lake Research Facility. Scientists are eager to do research on Jason's body as he has the natural ability to regenerate his own cells to heal himself, but he kills them. But his last victim, a scientist named Rowan, is able to cryogenically freeze him, but in the process she's frozen herself. 455 years later, a group of students and their professor discover Jason frozen and then discover Rowan frozen nearby. Even though Jason's cryogenically frozen, he still manages to chop this moron's arm off. They bring the frozen bodies aboard their spaceship and deduct as Rowan's body is preserved, they can bring her back to life. Professor Brandon Lowe is in debt and finds out Jason's body could be worth a fortune to collectors. But alas, Jason thaws out like an ice cream and the body count continues. Professor Lowe then explains the Earth is now uninhabitable, so humans relocated to Earth 2. Oh, and there's a robot there. Jason kills more of the ship's crew and Professor Lowe. Jason becomes a cyborg and punches the robot's head off. He's blown up and shot towards Earth 2, and the film ends with two teenagers seeing what they think is a falling star land in the lake nearby. I mean, Not the very worst of the series, but pretty low down there. 4 out of 10 for that one. This concludes my review for the Friday the 13th franchise. For more franchise reviews, check out my Nightmare on Elm Street review.